Bobbie Neate, author of Conspiracy of Secrets.
My book is a fascinating personal detective story, but in this video I'm going to concentrate on the two very strange women who were enticed into my mother's home when I was a child. There was a deep mystery about my stepfather. To give you a little bit of the background, I have discovered that he was the illegitimate son of one of our Prime Ministers, H.H. Asquith, 1908 to 1916. But one of the ways I discovered this was through the two strange women that lived in my home when I was a child. Stepfather called them Home Granny and Auntie Mamie, and they were meant to be his mother and his adopted sister, but through genealogical research I discovered that they were not. So I'm going to read some sections about them. Another thought struck me. If Venetia Stanley, Asquith's lover, had given birth to a bastard child, why had Venetia wanted him to have her surname? Was that what the aristocracy did in those days? I needed to find out. My investigations were continuing. In my head, I imagined using a three-pronged fork in some lonely, muddy field, digging deeper and deeper to find stepfather's roots. The first prong was my investigation into H.H. Asquith. The second, my search for Venetia Stanley's past history. The third was Home Granny, Louis's surrogate mother. Who had Home Granny really been? I needed to find her birth certificate, and then perhaps I could find out where she was born. I was pleased that Applegate was not a common surname, but I needed all the information I could, as my memory of her as a person was so hazy. I had little idea of how old she was when she died, so how could I start to hunt down her death and her birth certificates? To find out more, I'd have to visit the triangular graveyard in Trumpington, where she was buried. Over the coming months, I became used to receiving copies of birth, death and marriage certificates through the post. Some of the documents were enlightening, while others only assisted in the task of eliminating names. Home Granny's death certificate was one of the first I ordered. The document told me that Mary Ann Applegate died in May 1963. But because she died before 1970, her death certificate did not record her birth date or her maiden name. However, it did state that she'd been the widow of a cotton executive. Of course, I told myself, Louis would have given the registrar these details. He would have wanted this fact recorded. There was still much more work to do, and I still had that unpleasant feeling of snooping every time I had a Stanley document in my hand. Was Louis about to appear from behind my shoulder? To give those viewers a little bit of background, Louis Stanley was my stepfather, and I had discovered that he had been illegitimate through searching through all the birth and death certificates. But now I'm on to Mary Ann Applegate, his surrogate mother, because I want to find out why Asquith and Venetia Stanley chose her to look after their illegitimate child. They had to find somebody very trustworthy, and I was determined to find the link. I'll read another bit. The 1901 census became a vital document. First, I had to find out where Louis's so-called mother, Mary Ann Applegate, stayed on census night 1901. Assuming the information on her gravestone was correct, she would have been either 33 or 34. However, I'd been warned that it's notoriously difficult to track women through their declared age on census night, as they often lied, and tellers, believing this to be the least important detail, often failed to write women's ages correctly. So my search included a much wider age allowance than predicted. Luckily for me, there are only 10 possible females in the census with the name Mary Applegate who were aged between 27 and 47. The census included middle initials for some of the individuals, but again, I was told not to rely on this detail. So I included all the Marys, whatever their declared middle initial. I was able to rule out 2 immediately because they were past childbearing age. I ferreted again and found 4 more Mary Applegates. They fell off my list, as they were Applegates by marriage, not by birth. So now there were only 4 possibles. I slowly picked away at the list and eliminated another Applegate, for none of her details matched. Her father had been a dairyman, her second initial was J, and she lived in Islington. She now claimed to be only 27. I was now concentrating on 3 possible women. Each had A as their middle initial, and they'd all been Applegates at birth. Luckily, one of them I could rule out straight away, as her birth certificate had not been easy to obtain. She'd been Mary Alfreda, and she was probably too old, and had been born in Ely. And that is where I shall finish reading that section of the book, and I will tell you in a further video how I discovered the more details of the genealogical research on H.H. Asquith, Prime Minister of Great Britain.